seized up. These two pieces are seized solid. We're going to take it off and we'll put a freshly carded one on there. To take it off, we have to undo the bolts from outside the back of the backing plate. These bolts are somewhat special. You can see they have a nipple on the end. The nipple on the end stops these adjusting pieces, the sliders, from coming out. These two pieces there are seized up, so we're going to change that out. There's one thing to remember: there's a couple of spaces in here, and if they fall out, you've got to be sure they go back in, or it'll bend the backing plate in towards the adapter plate. When we fit the adjuster, we're going to put it through. You'll have to hold on to the bottom thing because this will slide right out, and we'll put the bolt in. We'll just put these in finger tight. Make sure they still slide, sure the space is in there. The reason we're only going to leave them finger tight is there's a certain amount of movement there, and when we fit the shoes to the drum, we will leave this loose enough to move, and that will be part of the setup of the shoes, but we'll get into that when we fit the shoes. So we're now ready to fit the wheel cylinder. We put the linkage through. And I'm going to start the fitting first, like I did with all the other things. I'm going to take the fitting all the way in, give you a maximum amount thing. There's always small amounts of wrench movement then. So we push that all the way in. I'm then going to fit the bolt. I fitted a new lock tab to the bolt. I'm going to put that in. I'll put that all the way in, like so. Have to bend up the lock tab ears. Just take a pair of, that secures that. So we're going to put the piece of linkage, the compensator linkage, line that up, a clevis pin, take our split pin, put it through the hole, bend that around. Cut the tail off. Bend the tail around. So, and we can put the rubber boot on. Put our through. Put that over the lip. So, take our two S's. Put that one in there. You've got an S on the rod and an S on the backing plate, and that's the linkage. We just have to put the bleed nipple in. Going to put a bit of grease on the end of the nipple, bleed nipple. I'm going to stick the ball like so on there, and I'm going to offer it into the hole. We're just going to nip that up now so that it doesn't leak when we start to put fluid into the reservoir. It doesn't have to be terribly tight because we're going to have to loosen it for the bleeding process. And that is the wheel cylinder fitted. So we're now going to fit the rear shoes. We're going to do it the reverse thing. We're going to make sure that these are straight, all of the cuts. The spring, or the holder for the spring, is in the right spot. And we're going to make sure we're between the two studs so that we don't get jammed up. And we push the shoes in like so, kind of back to front. Then we rotate them around until they're like that. We then have to pick up this pin here for the compensator. There, we push that on like so. We have to pick up the pin there. The self-adjuster has a hole in it, and we're going to pick up this pin up in there. So we push it on, like so, it slides on, and we push it inside there into the adjuster, making sure that our compensator rod is still on. So we're on the self-adjuster pin, we're in the slot of the wheel cylinder and of the adjuster. The bottom shoe's in place. Now we're going to work on the top shoe. We're going to push that into the slot there, and we'll lift that over there. This is the pull-off spring. You can see the shape of it there. This hooks into the clip in the backing plate, and this goes over the shoe at that point there. We'll put it through. We'll put our finger up behind the shoe, pull the shoe away a little bit. So you can see the way I'm pulling down on the spring, how that is indeed in the clip, because if it wasn't in the clip it would hook all the way through. So you know you're there. We're going to push the expander in out of the way, push our spring through. This nut stud's getting in our way, so we move that out of the way. Now we've got to pull down. There, you get a hold of it. You pull down, and there you can see at that point there the hook is around, or that spring is around there. So now those shoes are fitted, everything's on. So we're going to make a check now. I spoke earlier about how the self-adjuster also acts on the pin to keep the shoes straight against the drum. So what we do is I take a steel rule and a square, a tri-square, and I just nip them together lightly with a small pair of vice grips, just nicely, and I lay that on there, and I look along the shoe at this point here. I'm looking through there on this line, through there, and with the light behind me I can look in there and I can see that that shoe is flush, so that would be square to the drum. If it were laying over this way and there was light at that end of the tri-square, I'd let it back in a bit. If it was too far in, or I should say if it was too far out, the light would be at this end of the tri-square and I would let it in. To adjust it, we'd take the rubber bungs out of the backing plate and move this washer in or out. The washer would push the shoe back and forth like that by screwing it in or screwing it out, would change the plane of the brake shoe. So we'll check both of these. These are in good shape. I'll just go around so that I pick up both of these lugs there. I'll check under there, and those shoes are both square. We now need to adjust the compensator. I'm just going to demonstrate to you how this compensator works. What I've done is I've got the square driver on the back, and you can see how that bottom shoe comes in and out towards the drum. And what we'll do is we'll put the drum on, and then I'll set that up, and you'll be able to see the difference it makes. Before we put the drum on, we'll just recap. You can see we have the short part of the lining just above the cylinder here, and the short part of the lining just under the expander at the bottom. That's how it should be. Before we can make any adjustments inside the drum, we need to take this pin out and allow the two compensator rods to float. We'll just rough that up to give that a good bite. We turn it around, have 3 holes for the screws. We align that with the 3 holes there. We slip that on. Take our drum screws. So when we've got all the screws in and the drums home, what we're going to do now is we left the adjuster loose. So we're going to take the adjuster and we're going to tighten the shoes hard up against the drum. And when I say we're going to tighten them up hard, I really mean we want to make them as tight as we possibly can. What this is doing is squeezing the shoes against the drum and centralizing the adjuster. The drum's long since stopped turning, but we still continue to put pressure as much as we possibly can. I'm even using my thick wrench so that we get it really tight. Now I'm going to do the bolts up as tight as I possibly can, and that's how we centralize that part of the adjustment, or the adjuster. And then I'm going to let it off till it just moves. You see, we've got that just moving now. We'll go back to the compensator, the square on the back, and we take that and we can make the wheel stop moving. And what that's done is that's pushed that shoe down against the drum. And we're going to, I'm taking the square off the back, I'm putting a wrench on the lock nut. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lift the shoe away from the drum, just the tiniest amount. And then I'm going to hold the square and tighten my lock nut. And what that's done is it's given us a very minimum clearance there with the shoe, and that will give us a lot less brake pedal travel. Okay, once we've adjusted inside the drums, it's now necessary to make sure that the adjustment on this rod is correct. This is the rod from the brake pedal, and this will affect directly the amount of travel at the brake pedal. So we're going to remove as much of the free play as we can. We're going to pull against the rods. We push with our thumb here and we check to see whether or not the pin will line up. So we push in, take away all that free play, and we slip the pin in. Once we're happy with that, if we felt we're pulling too much, we can take this rod and we can adjust it like so, by the adjustment through there, or we can take it in and shorten the adjustment like so. It's a good idea to take away all of the free play, and I even take a tapered punch and pull against the linkage. This gives us a really good pedal, and it makes a difference. So this is where we do the adjustment. And that's the rods adjusted. Seen us, we've completed the left rear wheel. We went on and we did the right rear wheel. We're now going to do the fronts. I'm going to fit the backing plate to the stub axle and the hoses to the bracket on the shock absorbers. Going to put the lock tab and the bolt. To wiggle it around a little bit. Get the bolt started. So we get all the bolts in, we can tighten them up. Once we've got those tight, we can bend the lock tabs back up. We're now ready to put our hoses in. What I'm going to do is the same as before. I'm going to just start the locking nut, the nut that holds the hose to the bracket. And what we do at this point is we get this hose in a good position for the shape as the wheel turns back and forth. This hose needs to have an arc up towards the bracket, like so, and then we'll double check the line, the fitting. That's that done. You need to, as I said earlier, you need to do that one, and then we'll do this one after. Once again, taking the locking nut in, and while I've still got plenty of movement, I'll bring the pipe fitting to it. Start that. So I'll take the locking nut now in. Make sure that my hoses are uniform, they're both the same, that point. Then I'm going to lock up the fitting. Oops. And we'll go back on. So everything's tight there. For the purpose of demonstration, I'm going to put the shoes on now. This is going to show you how the hole in the back of the shoe goes onto the post, the adjusting post for the shoe. Once again, we take the lining, pull the spring around, for that in. Take my pliers at this end of the shoe, on the post. You can see that slides down. Push that all the way back down so that the drum will go on. We may have to encourage that back a little more yet. We take the bottom one, pull the spring towards you. Put the spring through the hole. Pick up the post. Watch the movement there as the friction washers come through. And that's the shoes on. I'm going to have to put the hub on now, although I can see the shoes are too far out, so I think I'm going to let them in. It'll give you an opportunity to see them move. You can see the shoe coming in or going away from me towards the backing plate using a screwdriver, and that's basically the adjustment. I'm going to do the same with the top one. The shoe's going in towards the backing plate there. And we're probably enough now. We'll put the hub together. So it's very, very important that we force grease right through the rollers on the wheel bearing. So we're going to keep punching the grease into the bearing. You can see it coming through there, through the rollers, and then we know if the grease is right in there. Go all the way round. Take the grease back out of the centre, point there, and you can see the grease coming through the bearing. You can see we've packed that bearing. We'll take a small amount, put it round the outside. I'll place that on a clean rag. I'll take the outer bearing, which is a little smaller but still very strong, heavy, and we'll punch some fresh grease into that. See that coming through. It's very important, as I said earlier, to get the grease into that bearing. Just spreading it on the outside doesn't cut it. The bearing will fail. And we'll spread that around. I'm going to put this beveled washer. You can see we have a bevel on the washer there and a bevel in here. Knock that bit of dirt out of there. We put the bevel in so the flat side is facing the bearing. We have an oil thrower or grease thrower. It has a small thread in there instead of a seal. It has a thread so as the hub spins, any grease that comes out is forced back into the hub. Let's put the big bearing on the onto the inner, and then I'm going to put the thrower in there. So I've banged the thrower into the hub, and the hub will slide on through there. There's no point in packing a lot of grease inside the hub. It won't travel. If it does travel, the bearing's well and truly overheated, so there's no need to do that. We've got plenty of grease in the bearing. Push the outer race on, and then we've got the washer. The washer has a tab in which to locate the slot. Again, well, as I told you when we took it off, it's left-hand thread, left-hand side of the car. And we're going to tighten the bearing up. What we're going to do is take it in. You want to make the bearing fairly tight. You certainly don't want any play or any looseness. The heat transfers out through the drum, through the hub. So if this bearing's loose, you're going to overheat the bearing. So we'll pull it in. If it's a new bearing, it needs to be somewhat tighter, just because we've only packed these. We've got the cotter pin or split pin. You can see I've twisted this split pin, and the reason for doing that is when we put it into the hole, it allows the legs to come back around. Inside the dust cover, there's a static electricity grounding arrangement, and you can see that somebody's taken this one off, and that's because they bend the lock tab, or the split pin I should say, back on itself and to there, and that causes that to break off, and that's what's happened there. So I've bent this around. We'll take this like so. That's that. Gentle pressure. And that's the hub built. Now we're going to true up the brake linings, or the brake shoes, I should say. You can see down through there the gap along that edge there is pretty even. And we'll try this one here. They're pretty good there. And we're pretty... We could let the top one in just a little bit too. We're going to take a deep socket and we'll tighten up the lock nuts. Now that I've adjusted the shoes for the position on the drum, I'm going to put the grommets in the backing plate, and they're just slipped in. That completes that. So now we're ready to sand the inside of the drum and fit the drum to the hub. So we'll break the glaze on the drum. Tap the dirt out of it, then we can fit it to the hub. We'll fit our screws. Tighten our screws up. So now we're ready to complete the other side, and then we'll be ready to bleed the brakes. Connect a rubber tube to the bleed nipple, undo the bleed nipple, and have your assistant pump the master cylinder lever forwards until you remove all the air from the system. Could you pump, please? When all the air stops coming, you can close off the nipple. The sequence for doing this is to bleed the left rear brake first, then the right rear. Then we're going to bleed the front cylinder on the left and the front cylinder on the right. This will have bled the large master cylinder. When you've done that, you're then going to bleed the low bleed nipple on the left cylinder and then the low bleed nipple on the right cylinder, and that will bleed the small master cylinder, and that's the sequence you do for bleeding the brakes.
Okay, here you'll see an old master cylinder, and you can see it's real, at least I hope you can see, it's real eating away there. They can weld those back, they can re-sleeve them, brass or stainless steel. That one actually takes 2 sleeves in it. I've had them done and had them welded up, so you got the original equipment. Or people like Albers and Post 55 will sell you new, and I know Post 55 recently got one, and it was less than $300. So I believe the front and rear cylinders are around 100. Don't quote me on that, but that's about what I paid for them, I believe. They also have new shoes, drums, washers, screws, screw post. You can get the shoes with the pads on them, or you can get the shoes with the pads off. You get the shoes with the pad on, they put them all on one direction, so when Ralph talked about you got to get that leading and tailing edge, you won't find that on the Post 55, but if you want to put them on and get yours CAD plated, and then put your own pads on there, rivet them on, you can put them on the way that Ralph showed you if you're a purist. Anyway, the cups and the pistons. Yeah, to get the pistons out, a lot of times I plug up the holes with my fingers. I put a compressed air nozzle in one of them, and I shoot them out the end after soaking them several days in a liquid wrench type of material to get them out. So that kind of adds to a few things. I guess I should also mention that the pads I did get from Post 55, where the clevis fits on the end, I had to grind those off a little bit to make the clevis pin fit, but it wasn't any big deal, just a little bit of material. When you're pumping the brakes, you put a pry bar in there as such, and then you can pump it like this. An interesting thing about this, after you bleed your brakes, if you pull it and it comes back easy a ways, then it gets hard and you pull it again and it's less and you can pump it up. That means you've got air in the system. So just a highlight, but that covers a little bit more of the pumping of the brakes. Okay, on the adjuster and back, I've got this apart, but you want this screwed all the way down in, which means back through the backing plate. And you want these all the way in, because if not, when you try to put the shoe on, or the drum on, they will not clear the shoes. So you want the shoes way down when you first put the drum on. Then you go through the procedure of tightening up that Ralph. Now this was a picture of the back, but on the front, I always take and whack the shoe on the bottom and top with my hand a couple of times to make sure they're all the way in also. On those self-adjusters, you need to make sure they're all the way up so that you can get the drum on.